We arrived in Soap Lake April 24th, 1938. I was 11 years old.
So what were your first impressions as an 11-year-old boy?
My God, where did they send us? Well, coming from Los Angeles in that area, San Diego, Compton actually is where we lived when we moved up here. Talk about cultural shock. I was the kid from the big city with the pointed shoes. Well, of course, there was the school bully, and anybody who was new to the school had to be confronted by this young man. And I took my turn, got the crap beat out of me, because I was from the big city and, you know, kind of an oddity, you might say. My grandfather, who built the hotel originally, came down with arthritis, and he and my grandmother came to Southern California, where we lived, because it was warm and it made him feel better. And he convinced my dad to give up a business opportunity with a music school in the area to come up and take over the hotel for a short while until my grandfather could recuperate. And a month after we got here, my grandfather died, and we've been here ever since. My grandfather was a successful businessman in Russia at the time, 1916. The Bolsheviks, in their wisdom, began killing Jews, and it was called the pogrom. He could see what was happening and decided to get out of there as soon as he could. So he took my dad out of school. My dad at that time was in the Moscow Conservatory of Music in Moscow, Russia. Then without any money, no passports, just escaped, you might say, up through Siberia, down through Japan to Yokohama, where they caught a ship called the Hawaii Maru, which took them to San Francisco. And my grandfather, being a successful businessman, ultimately became a pushcart merchant, you might say, with selling vegetables and fruit. How he got to Seattle, I'm not quite sure, but they wound up in Seattle. My dad was 16 years old at the time, entered in school in the first grade because he couldn't speak a word of English. And ultimately, my grandmother and my dad's two brothers were being hidden in Russia by sympathizers. And because my grandfather and my dad were from Europe, they were acquainted with spas like I had in Eastern Europe. And my grandfather heard about Soap Lake and the medicinal qualities of the water, and ultimately bought a piece of ground and commenced building the hotel, casting every concrete block himself, buying lumber in Cle Elum, and bringing it to Soap Lake over the old Vantage Highway in an old chain drive Ford truck, built the hotel, and opened it up for business, obviously. In 1927, he bought the old Johnson Hotel, which stood where the Chevron station is now here in town. Ultimately applied for a permit to move it. They denied the permit, well, he moved it anyway. Gouged up 7 miles of highway, and ultimately rebuilt that 7 miles of highway. Joined it to the part that he had built himself, and that became then the Lewis Hotel.
How many rooms were in that?
26.
26?
Total.
Total.
There were 8 rooms in the old part and 18 rooms in the new part.
Now, did it have a dining area?
The dining area was in the old part, the part that my grandfather built.
Oh, who did all the cooking?
My grandmother.
Oh my. So in the summer she was really busy?
Yeah, well that was the thing. They had to make a year's wages in 3 months because they had no heat in the building in that time. So they would just button it up and endure for 7 or 8 months until it got warm again. In 1945, a plumber by the name of Pete Benville contacted my dad, and because the war was on, was not able to get the prime material, but they installed a steam system. At that point, then the hotel was open the year round. That was after my folks had it, of course.
Okay. And now, when did your folks take it over from?
1938.
1938.
After my grandfather died.
Oh, okay, that's right. I'm sorry.
Where did your grandparents live during the winter time?
In the hotel.
Even though there was no heat?
Well, they had probably potbelly stoves, enough to keep warm and keep the water running so it didn't freeze. But it was the theater. There wasn't even one in Ephrata at the time. The one that was built in Ephrata was the old Marjo, which is not there anymore. And then, of course, the Lee Theater came in after that.
What year do you think this Sunset Theater was built?
It was there when we came in '38, so obviously it was prior to that time. Of course, it was quite convenient for us kids to slip over next door and go to the show.
Did you pay to go in, or did you sneak in like a lot of people?
Well,
The
a little
show
of
was-
both.
A little of both. About how much was the price of a ticket?
Probably 5 cents.
Okay.
I can remember one time when we were eating crab. I don't know where the crab came from, but you know how crab smells when it gets a little bit old. So we went to the show and took the crab with us, and we cleaned out 3 rows of seats.
Who's we?
My sister and brother and I.
What was your favorite movie?
Oh gosh, Linda, I can't remember that far back, to tell you the truth. I imagine a Western of some sort would be my favorite movie. That's my grandfather and my grandmother, and that's the dining room that you asked about.
Oh, really? Oh, great. About how much was the price of a room?
At this point, I don't really know, but I know that at one point we were renting rooms in the hotel part for $8 a night.
And a meal would cost, or was that part of?
No, the meal would probably be extra. I imagine $1, $1.50 for a meal. I mean, a meal.
Yes.
Probably 5 or 6 courses. And you can see there's a potbelly stove in the corner, which is probably how they kept warm during the winter time. My grandfather built the hotel in 1919.
So he left Russia in 1916.
1916,
So about
yes.
3 years or so to wind up
That's
there.
about right, because he had to accumulate enough money to not only buy the land, but also to pay for the building materials and that type of thing.
Did he go to Los Angeles and then come up here, or?
No, he came to San Francisco is where they came in.
Okay.
Actually, our name when they arrived in San Francisco was Agranoff, but the people in customs couldn't spell it, so they changed it to Agranoff.
Ever think about going back?
Me?
Yeah. Agranoff?
No, but you know, it was spelled O''Grannovitch. And Dad used to say, I don't know whether he was joking or whether it was actually true, that there was an Irish general that escaped Ireland and moved to Russia, and it was so I could be part Irish. I don't know.
How did your grandmother and the rest of the family get to the United States?
Well, after a couple of years or so, my dad and actually my grandfather had accumulated enough money to send for them. But I don't think that was until they actually moved to Seattle. And again, I don't know how they got to Seattle or what prompted them, but it was kind of ironic. A number of years ago, you all know Joe Malaspino. He had a cousin living in Wenatchee who was also an immigrant. And he wasn't a young man, but this man had psoriasis that used to come to Soap Lake because of the water. And Morris Cicchetti was his name. He had a shoe shop in Wenatchee. Some of you may have known him in the past. Anyway, one time Morris was staying at a motel in Soap Lake, and Joe and I went out to see Morris. I had never met him, but Joe wanted me to meet him. And when he heard my name Agranoff, he actually started crying. He burst out into tears. Come to find out, when my dad got to Seattle and was put in the 1st grade, Morris, who had already been here in the United States, was put in charge of my dad because both of them were immigrants. And this was the first time he'd heard my dad's name from the time he was in first grade until the time that he met me. So that would have been a lot of years.
Oh, my.
He told me some stories about them stealing peaches off the trees on the way to school and things like that.
Okay, Dad, tell them the story about how Grandpa got here on the train. What they did, what your dad did.
My dad was a graduate of the Moscow Conservatory of Music, and as such, he wore a uniform with lots of braid, gold braid on it. And when they escaped from Russia, my grandfather told my dad to wear his uniform because he emulated that of a general or an officer in the Russian army. And that periodically the train would be stopped and they would check papers. Well, there was very crude bunks in these railroad cars, and my dad and my grandfather were in an upper bunk, and my dad was on the outside where he could hang his arm over the side and they could see the gold braid. At one point, Dad tells me they were stopped and the Russian guards came on board looking for papers. And my grandfather told my dad, hang your arm over the side, they won't bother you, because they see the gold braid and they think you're an officer. Sure enough, they came in and they started tugging on my dad's arm, and my grandfather said, don't bother him, he's drunk, he doesn't know anything, he's asleep. And they went on. So at that point they were, you might say, home free.
Oh my.
That'd be a scary trip.
Where are these? Right here. That,
This building?
no, this, right here.
Oh, that's the old Soap Lake water plant. Where they used to take water and evaporate it off and make the Soap Lake salts.
That's what I was wondering.
And soap and oil and that type of thing.
Because the foundations are still there.
Oh yeah, so it burned down a long time ago. And this was a dance hall right here.
Chuck, oh, go ahead.
This was a dance hall right here.
It's over close to where the Zimmer apartment was.
Yeah.
Right, right. This was before the Zimmer apartments were built.
Well, closer to the lake in that picture.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the building in front where the old V store used to be
That
isn't
would
there
be
yet.
It would be over here, Olson's place.
Olson's was,
Oh, Olson's would
it
have been
was
closer
right
to
on
here.
that corner, yeah.
Right.
Do you remember when Ole Olson and Blanche moved to Soap Lake?
Would have been probably 1942, 43, I'm thinking. But before they moved in there used to be the Soap Lake Reporter, or the newspaper. Archie Waddington used to own that.
That was before Mr. Sid Jackson had the Soap Lake Reporter.
Yes. In fact, I think Sid bought it from Archie. And Soap Lake, of course, was quite a recreational area for people from the coast because of the medicinal waters and the hot sun and the green mud. And right after the war, it wasn't fashionable to go to Soap Lake anymore. It was easier to jump on a plane and fly to Hawaii or to go to Europe and so on. And so the folks didn't actually abandon the hotel concept, but Dad put in a music store and ran that for a few years, and then that was kind of fizzled out, so that's when they decided to go to a Chinese restaurant. And that's why Agranoff became a Chinese restaurant.
I know this story. I know this story from before, but I didn't realize then it wasn't a hotel then by the time.
Oh yes, it was still a hotel.
Okay.
It was still a hotel because there were still some diehard people that would come over from Seattle to soak up the sun and the water, but not like it used to be at that point. There were people who would come over there religiously every year. You could just about count on them. Matter of fact, they would make their reservation a year ahead of time, because if you didn't have a reservation at one point, you didn't have a place to stay. We had them sleeping in bathtubs and on the back porch and the whole 9 yards, because they were. And one thing I will say about the people in Soap Lake at the time, if you owned cabins or a hotel, you became part of the community in that if you didn't have a vacancy, you began calling around to your friends who did have, and you found a place for them to stay. And I can remember in Soap Lake on a Saturday night, you could not walk down the street or the sidewalk elbow to elbow. There was just like a steady stream of people walking back and forth, you know, visiting and looking in the shop windows and so on.
Tell them about the Chinese restaurant, you know, the cook.
Oh, the cook was named Louis Woon, Chinese man. They brought him in from Seattle to do the cooking.
Oh, boy.
And he would,
Someone's looking.
we had a wok about the size of this table that he did his cooking with, and he always had a cigarette in his mouth, and the ashes would fall in there and he'd be snooping around. You know. But it was the only Chinese restaurant in Grand County at the time. And we had a lot of people that would come there. I hated Saturday night, absolutely hated Saturday night, because people would get looped and they'd come in around midnight to eat, and bad news.
And you waited on tables.
I waited on tables, I washed dishes, I did the whole 9 yards. Well, all of us did actually, the three kids, my sister and brother and I. Mother did the part of the cooking or the preparing of the vegetables and so on. And Louis would be in there, asses dropping off. Well, of course, if you cross the street directly from the hotel, on the south side would be the telephone company owned by Clausen's, Mr. and Mrs. Clausen. And then next to them was the old city jail, which is about the size of this room. And a meat market was the next place, and then the fire station was right there too, which was at the top of the hill. And there again, at the top of the hill was the pole with a siren on top of it. And that was just like there used to be here in Ephrata, if there was a fire in town, the siren would go off and all the volunteers would congregate at the fire station. But that was kind of the dividing point. Everything was east and west. If the east part got new sidewalks, the west side better get them or else, kind of thing, you know. Then there was kind of a vacant lot and another sanitarium. My buddy Leo Hanley used to live there. Beyond that was the old Lakeside Hotel. Charlie Malin owned that. And then there was a little shop, which ultimately became Shalau's grocery store. Incidentally, when we were kids, we would go down the street on roller skates, and Mr. Shalau used to have the produce out there on display, and we would grab something as we went by, and he'd come out there and shake his fist at us. And then there was the James Cafe and Tavern. And on the corner was, by this time you're down in the middle of town. On the right-hand side was another grocery owned by Sophie Toomey. I don't know if you remember her, Linda, or not, but she was kind of a wild character. And then there was a drugstore on the corner owned by Walt Goodwin. And then Myra's dress shop on the right-hand side, as the Dewdrop Inn was...
Was it a hotel too, or?
No, it was kind of like a general store.
Oh, okay.
And in the back was an ice house. They used to, in the wintertime, they would go out to Blue Lake and cut big blocks of ice and bring them into town and store them in this building with sawdust. It was the coolest place in town.
Literally.
Literally. No, the Dewdrop Inn is probably where about the Shell station sits right now, in that general vicinity. On the left-hand side, if you were to go back up the street, was the Bob White Cafe and Tavern. And when we were kids, in the summertime, we'd go and dance at the tavern, get kicked out every Saturday night. And next Saturday night, we'd be back dancing. And then there was kind of a souvenir shop with a bowling alley, duck pins bowling alley.
Was that Tommy's newsstand at that time, or did that come later?
I can't even remember the name of the person, but I know they paid us so much a line to set pins, and you had to be very quick.
That's where the liquor store is now?
Yes, I think so, in that area.
The newsstand was in that area too. I've seen a picture.
Vickery had that, I think.
Vickery and...
Dale Vickery.
Okay, and then after the newsstand, which would have been where the liquor store is now too, next to that is the Shrag.
Shrag's massage place.
And it's been there since the 40s or...
Oh yes, oh yeah. Lauren Shrag had that. And then proceeding up the street, there was Gambriel's place, but that was in later on.
That's where Bridget's at now.
Okay.
He opened that in '55, but it was Carl's Cozy Cafe before then.
That's Carl, Myra Kaysen's, my husband, Carl Kaysen. And there was kind of like an outdoor dining area in that area, which is now the Opera House of Don's. It was built on that piece of property. And on the corner was a tavern, and then there was the New Beach Hotel across the street, which ultimately burned. And it wasn't too much from there on, except a restaurant that was owned by Karras, Harry Karras, K-A-R-A-S. He owned that place. And in front of his place was the old Soap Lake Fountain, where people would come and fill bottles with Soap Lake water. And at the top of the hill, then there wasn't too much from there to the top of the hill. There was, if anything. And then we ran into Pat O'Brien's place, would have been in that area.
And that's where the dog grooming, Happy Tails is now.
Did you ever visit my folks' market?
Oh, all the time. Because the next market was downtown, so if we wanted something, we would shoot over to Lanigan's and, oh yeah.
Was there a school in town?
3-room school.
Where was that?
It's where the City Hall sits now.
By the fire hall.
Yeah.
Was that street there then?
Oh, yes.
That street that goes in front of the City Hall now was there?
Yeah, it was there.
Was it dirt?
Probably gravel.
And the school was right there where the City Hall is?
Yes, right among the rocks. We used to play tackle football on there, on the rocks. If we had a pair of shoulder pads, man, we were with it.
Who was your favorite teacher?
Actually, all 3 teachers were my favorites. Miss Dick, Miss Cuddyback, and Miss McCamey.
You were in trouble all the time when Miss Dick.
I can remember one time, May 1st, it was, we were going to have we went out to collect wildflowers for May 1st, May Day, and then we were supposed to come back to the school for a party. Well, Charlie Nichols and I decided we weren't coming back, so we took off, and Miss Dick came looking for us, dragged us by the scruff of the neck back to school, laid us across her lap, individually, of course, although she was big enough where both of us could have done it. And started wailing on us with her paddle. The paddle was about that thick and about that long. And I can still hear Charlie Nichols yelling, "My dad's on the school board, whack. He's gonna get you fired, whack." And I'll bet you, just like me, he didn't tell his dad when he got home what had happened.
Who were your other classmates?
Paul Clausen, George Waltho, Paul Hampton, Leo Hanley, Paul Robertson, Les Morton was one of the school. He was a year or so ahead of us.
Sounds like an all-boys school.
I can't remember the girls.
They didn't play tackle football?
No. The girls didn't play.
How many grades? Oh,
8.
8 grade. And then what happened?
Then we came to Ephrata.
Okay.
Rode the school bus for 4 years.
How did that go over Soap Lake kids to the Ephrata schools?
Actually, it went out well. As a matter of fact, 2/3 of the basketball and baseball and football teams were kids from Soap Lake. George Waltho, Billy Ness, Paul Robertson. I played did a lot of bench time. But we were not treated any differently coming from Soap Lake than the ones from Ephrata. Well, I graduated in May of 1944, and in July I was at the University of Washington for a year. I went into the service in the United States Navy. Came back in late 46.
To Soap Lake? Or...
Yes, well, to Soap Lake, but I actually had to get my grades back up. So I went to Central Washington College of Education at the time to get my grades back up, and then I went back to the University of Washington.
Okay.
Did you swim in the lake much?
That's where I learned to swim. I used to wear these old woolen bathing suits that chafed the hell out of you. We called it the Soap Lake Walk.
We all have it. When we were little, we all have it.
That was before spandex, and but Oh yeah, we used to swim a lot.
Who rented out the swimsuits down at that place?
Joe Elliott's place on the beach. So it would have been Joe. You could rent most anything there. Well, actually, the only place that we actually danced was at the Bob White Tavern. Every Saturday night they had a dance there.
The Bob White was pretty big then. Had a dance floor in
Yeah.
it.
Oh yeah.
Talk about the businesses. Okay, so the street that Lewis Hotel was on, going down back out towards the post office, today's post office.
Oh, okay. On the corner, well, it was the theater, and on the corner was his last name was Fay.
In the brick building?
In that brick building on the corner he was a masseur also. And then across the street was Lanigan's Grocery Market. Was there a place on the corner that was an old hotel that had?
Before.
That was in the back street.
Yeah, no, there was one on the corner there, and I was wondering if you remember that, or if you remember the foundation of that,
Well, we used to play in the foundation.
across from my folks' house.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was also one there in the parking lot there.
In fact, it was quite modern in those days with a swimming pool.
That's the McDonald's building.
That must be it. I'm not sure what the name was. There was the Lanigan's grocery store. Then there was a garage.
Well, before the garage, didn't Pete Benville Jr. live there, or Mrs. Benville? Or
I'm
was
not
that
sure
later?
where they lived, tell you
Okay.
the truth, Linda.
Okay,
But then there was a garage that, I want to say Larry Casciati. Does that make sense?
Could be Dewey Johnson owned it later.
Dewey Johnson, he owned it later.
Yes.
He's the one that put two cars together, front and back. I don't know if you remember that or not.
I heard
So it was going down the street, it looked like it was going back the other way.
But that was Casciati's garage when you were
Yes.
growing up.
And then further on down would have been Houghton's Lumberyard on the corner.
That's where West Haven, the building is called West Haven.
Yes,
The
yeah, that
secondhand
was-
store now.
That was Houghton's Lumberyard.
And then later Frankie Karras' lumberyard, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's where we used to wait to catch the bus to school in the morning. Mr. Houghton would get up early and start a fire in the potbelly stove so at least it would be warm while we were waiting for the bus.
Can I ask about the street behind it where my folks lived on First or Ash? John Nordstrom had a boarding house there, and it still exists, that building. Do you remember John Nordstrom?
Yes.
Do you remember anything about that building?
I know that it was there, and I knew the Nordstrom family, but that's about it.
Can you identify the brick building on the other side of the theater, right on the
That
corner?
was the Mr. Fay.
And what did he do?
He was a masseur.
A masseur. It wasn't a bank or anything.
No,
then?
no.
No.
We didn't have a bank in town. The only bank we had was here in Ephrata, where the Wilson Creek State Bank is what they called it, and that's where the beauty parlor is on the corner, across from the parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
Roy Mundy's old.
Monday's old real estate office
That was a
was the
bank.
Wilson Creek State Bank.
Well, right behind that phase, that one thought was once told out old City Hall was there. Is that
Where
right?
was that?
City Hall, right behind that brick building on the corner.
Next to the theater. On the,
I don't remember that being the city hall.
There was a building there.
Behind that building, on the alley though, was the local electric company owned by Hannafin.
Did your folks ever go to the Soap Lake Depot out in Grand Orchards and pick up
Every day.
every day?
I was just explaining to Chuck, that was kind of a who got there first type thing, where you parked your car so that you could snag these people when they were getting off the train at Grand Orchards.
Quite a competition.
Oh yes, George Walthall's father was there, and I imagine several others that I can't remember at this point, but I know that Dad, every day we would be out there picking up people off the train and bringing them into town. And also at the bus station, which happened to be the James Cafe.
So did your hotel have a doctor there, you know, as part of the sanitarium, or what kind of services were offered there?
Well, actually, mostly hot soap lake baths and massage. Yes, we had somebody there, but I can't remember the name.
A medical doctor there?
No, no, he was not a medical doctor. The only medical doctor in town was Dr. Robertson, Paul Robertson's father.
So most of the sanitariums had a masseuse or something, somebody like that, and they're what they called them sanitariums then, but they're what we consider spas now.
Yes, yes. Well, of course, it would start right around Memorial Day. It was the start of the tourist season, and people would come to Soap Lake for anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to a month. Some of them with some type of affliction, or some of them with just the need to get away from Seattle, Spokane, whatever, soak up the sun and swim and so on. And I think I alluded to the fact that on a Saturday night, you could not walk shoulder to shoulder down the street. There were so many people coming and going.
Is that just on the sidewalk, or is that?
Mostly on the sidewalk as you go downtown, down the hill.
So if the sidewalk was full, you kind of stepped out into the street?
More than likely, or get trampled.
How about Buerger's doing? Buerger's
Yeah.
disease.
Well, in 1938, was it 38? I'm not sure exactly the year, but it would have been close to 38. No, 1940 is when they opened up McKay Hospital for Buerger's patients. Hospital was built as a Buerger patient hospital, and it was dedicated with Governor Martin. And the reason I remember that is because I was in a Boy Scout troop, and we were there as part of the dedication. It would have been like 39 or 40, thereabouts. Well, they were all World War I veterans, pretty much so, and that's where they thought Buerger's disease was something that they picked up in the trenches in France and during the war. The one that I remember specifically was Sam Gorman and his wife Florence. He had both legs amputated and I think several fingers. But they were a good group. They were there because they had to be there in order to check this disease. It didn't cure it, but the water checked it. It was the only water that the only way that they knew how to stop the disease from progressing. There were others that we knew from time. There was one man from New York by the name of Bastido who used to come out every summer. He was a Buerger patient, but he would stay with us at the hotel and take the hot Soap Lake baths, and it made him feel better. But he was an ex-police officer from New York City.
Did they ever use the mud?
Not so much the Buerger patients, but the tourists from Seattle, they loved the mud.
Do you remember the Indians?
Every summer they would come pitch their teepees on the East Beach, and we would, as kids, we would let them ride our bicycles if they would let us ride their horses. So that's we always look forward to seeing them.
Was there horse races at that time? Indian horse races?
I imagine so, but I don't know exactly where.
And in your hotel, did you have a room with tubs in it, or did you have separate rooms? Were there tubs in separate
just
rooms?
a room with tubs.
How many tubs did you have?
3.
Were there separate rooms for men and women, or?
Well, they were in their own little cubicle.
Do you remember the nudist colony?
Oh boy, do I.
Oh boy, do I.
I'm not sure I want to take it.
So you're telling us that you did hike the West Hills?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, even better than that.
All right, Julian, this is your chance. What's the story?
At what age were you?
Sylvia probably knows the story.
In
He'll tell you.
13, 14.
You collect the mud.
Well, that was another story.
Oh, so tell us about both stories.
Well, we were, as kids, we would dive and bring up the mud and put them in a bucket and sell it for 25 cents a bucket. These folks that loved the mud, who didn't know how to get it. That's how we used to make a little spending money. Would be the green goopy stuff off the East Beach primarily. As far as the nudist colony is concerned, there were people who were how would I say it, would come there just because of the nudist colony. And so some of us would rent a rowboat and drift by the nudist colony with binoculars.
That's a normal thing for guys.
13-year-olds.
Yeah.
Especially.
Curiosity.
Yes.
You know what it did to the cat.
Okay, so with the nudist colony, would you kind of describe where it was then?
Well, actually, there was two separate ones, one for the women and one for the men. The women's part had like little rock half circles for each person, so that they could not be seen from the road that went on to the men's nudist colony. Now, the men were not quite as prudish. They would walk around nude.
And now the road you're talking about, was that the road that's now kind of blocked at Sam Israel's land there at the edge of town? And the
It didn't go quite that far. It was primarily where those houses are on the west side of the lake.
Do you remember construction of the road along Soap Lake and also Grand Coulee Dam? When you
Oh,
talked
yes. Dad, during the construction of the dam, used to take some of the residents of the hotel on a tour up to the dam, and I used to go every once in a while.
Do you remember hearing any stories about Horse Thief Cave or
Oh, yes.
anything that went on out there?
I can remember as a Boy Scout, we were doing some, as one of the requirements for one of the badges, we were doing some cooking in the outdoors. We were going to cook eggs and bacon and so forth, and my job was to go collect snow so that they could melt it down and make hot chocolate. And they kept finding little lumps in it. It turned out it was rabbit poop.
Oh my goodness.
I never lived that down. They never put me on that detail. Well, that Horse Thief Cave was quite an oddity at the time. And when I worked with the Bureau on survey, we ran into all kinds of snakes, mostly rattlers. And in the spring, when they would come back to start working again, they would be blasting, and this big ball of snakes would come out of the ground. Rattlesnakes and bull snakes all wrapped up together, you know. Ordinarily they're mortal enemies. But I'd get so excited when I saw a snake, I thought, well, the next snake that I kill, I'm going to make a belt buckle out or a belt out of it. But I get so excited to chop them up that wasn't enough to make a watch band out of it. But I had a whole jar of rattles that we got when I was working out there.
Did many people live in the Westmont Acres area, or did you hike out there as a kid?
No, that didn't even exist until later on.
Who are some of the really memorable characters? I mean, if you look back over the last 7 decades or something, and some
Soap
people,
Lake?
yeah, Soap Lake. People spring to mind.
I guess the one that comes to mind mostly is George Walthall's mother, Maggie.
Why is that?
She was really quite a character. She was the mayor of Soap Lake for a time. Typical Irish person. If she loved you, she loved you. If she hated you, look out.
Where did you fall in that category?
Well, because I was George's friend, she liked me.
Talk about the kind of mayor she was in that whole story with the, if you recall any aspects of that story when she took the sheriff's, or the police chief's gun.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what happened, because that was probably, at that age, I didn't really pay too much attention, but she ruled the town with an iron fist. If you wanted anything done, you went to Maggie. And I'm getting back to your question. Apparently the town marshal didn't acquiesce to what she wanted him to do, and so she went and said, I want your gun and your badge, and he said no, and I think she took it by force. She was a big person.
Big woman.
Big person. But she and her husband both, Mr. Walthall, were registered nurses at one time, and came to Soap Lake and opened up a sanitarium.
Did you ever camp down by the lake when George got kicked out of his bedroom so his folks could rent his bedroom out?
No, but I think I slept in every room in the hotel at one time or another. I can remember sleeping on a mattress on the back porch because they rented my room to someone.
Can you tell us about your brother and sister in Soap Lake and life with them, or any memorable thoughts about them growing up?
Well, we all grew up together. We all had our responsibilities at the hotel. And as I said earlier, we were dishwashers, waiters, cooks, garbage men, mowed the lawn, we did everything, made the beds, chambermaid work. We were all, it was a family operation.
What brought Sylvia into this picture?
Oh, gee.
Well, I was home from college one summer of '47, I believe. And I was a soda jerk at the hotel. And my brother was going around with her sister. She had come to Soap Lake with her parents.
For the water.
For the water and the sun. And my brother introduced her to me. And I had a beard just like I have now, pretty much so. And she could hardly wait to get out of town. Not because of me, but...
Coming from Seattle to Soap Lake, it's quite a shocker.
That's what they say.
So she said she was going back to Seattle, and I said, well, I'll take you to the railroad station, which would have been in Ephrata. And...
How old were you guys at this time?
I would have been probably 19, 20. And said, I'm coming back to the university, can I see you? And she said, well, I'll think about it. 61 years later, here we are.
Yes, 61 years.
And my dad was in seventh heaven because he still spoke fluent Russian at the time. Matter of fact, he had 7 or 8 different languages that he spoke. But he would meet with the Doukhobors, who would come into the hotel, and they would rattle off in Russian by the hour. And it made him feel good because he didn't actually have anyone else to converse with.
My folks always talk so highly of your parents, and I love your mother, and I remember your father, and I remember them always bragging about your father's ability with music, his
The violin.
And of course my dad just had one lesson, was just a fiddler, but he had a lot of respect for your father. Did your father own a Stradivarius?
Yes.
He did. Yes, and so he had this education, this music education in his home country, and then he continued in Seattle?
Yes, actually, he went from grade school into high school, graduated from Franklin High School in Seattle. And because of his music background, went to work for Professor Morris Rosen at the University of Washington, teaching violin. And ultimately wound up, when we moved from Chicago to San Diego when I was 4 years old, he went to work teaching music with the Alfred Arts Academy, which was in the area. It's kind of interesting, during the Prohibition in Chicago, he had a number of gangsters' children as pupils, and they watched over him because they recognized his abilities and the fact that he was a good teacher. And if anybody got tough with my dad, they better look out. They wound up with broken knees.
So did your dad play music at the hotel?
All the time. That was his first love, was his music.
Was he ever tempted to pack up and head back to Los Angeles? I mean, did he...
Oh, I think maybe he did, but he understood that he had obligations there in Soap Lake, and that kind of put the kibosh on him.